Yeah.
Okay, because then you'll get the thumbnails on the left, which will let you advance them without scrolling.
Okay, what I do here is page
Line
down like
scroll.
this.
Page down working? Oh, well, that's good.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So
Because
so
it
that
wasn't working for you before.
okay, yeah. I don't want to touch something, but I think it's in the scrolling. You have vertical, horizontal, and wrapped, and I think that's a wrapped option that worked.
Okay.
So um, let's start. Um, so Matt, do you want the chair slides, or you want to go through those?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay.
That's fine.
So I'm starting the recording. Let's start this interim meeting. Page 10 is working. So make sure your video is off. I think it's fine. Mute your microphones unless you're speaking. Yeah, we're gonna use the WebEx chat for the queue, and fill the blue sheet that are in the Etherpad. So the Etherpad, I think everyone got the link, or maybe Med, you can add the link into the Jabber
slide
room, or
shared anymore.
okay. So yeah, so make sure the blue sheets are filled. This is the not well.
You're not sharing anymore.
I'm not sharing anymore. Okay.
Eric and I say you're not sharing anymore. Maybe
Okay.
We see nothing.
You were sharing and then you did something and stopped.
So I'm gonna try to reselect that. And I was sharing the note well.
It's an important slide.
Yeah. It's almost the only reason we have this chair slides and not the agenda. I don't see those being shared. Oh yeah, is it fine?
Yep, it's good now. I have it.
Okay. So if you're not aware of the not well, please read this slide or take the time to read it and be aware that those not well applies to this interim meeting. So logistic, we need a minute taker. So who is volunteering?
We'll take minutes.
Okay, thank you, Michael. So Jabber room, everything is, well, you have all the links there. The document, the status for the documents, we are essentially working on two documents, which is the architecture. I mean, I think the right order should be requirements and the architecture. So that's the two ones we would like to move forward before going any further. We're socializing DRIP outside of the IETF. So maybe, Bob, you want to say a few words on that?
Yeah, I got to mute myself. Okay. Always helps to unmute. The ANSI UAS roadmap version 2 is in final edits. They have to finish it this week. We have one more call tomorrow. I've gotten general text in the SDO section of Chapter 4 on the general IETF definition blurb, our charter, and then pointer to our document page. And I've gotten into specific gaps where we have items addressing that. I've gotten work in progress IETF and reference to those documents. So IETF will be in the final release of the ANSI UAS roadmap, which FAA is representatives in the discussion are quite pleased with. So we squeaked in, and we made it in. We'll have time with version 3 to be more effective, but they want to get version 2 published by the end of June. So the final edits are supposed to be in Friday. So that's the status of the ANSI UAS roadmap. Moritz, you can talk to the ICAO digital identity. It's coming up. Actually, their first meeting is right now. They had to cancel over this for their major stakeholders are only available at this time. Stu and I will be joining their meeting next week. And this is a normalization of digital identity across aircraft, both manned and unmanned. So we have quite a bit to say in that. They are interested. Stu is the one who got our foot in the door on that. And we're probably should let him speak to how that's progressing, but we expect to be able to have considerable input into this ICAO digital identity efforts. Stu?
Yeah, for anyone who's not familiar, ICAO is the International Civil Aviation Organization, and their members are nation states, of which there's 193 currently. They have an effort called the International Aviation Trust Framework, which has 3 subordinate working groups, one of which is on digital identity, one of which is on trust reciprocity, and one is the Global Resilient Aviation Interoperable Network, which is their own walled garden internet on which they've been working with ICANN to get a big honking IPv6 address block. And I've been sticking my oar in, as you might imagine. And fortunately, we have other IETF representation there as well. Fred Templin, although he has obviously a very different approach technically. And we have a great champion in Rob Seegers of the FAA. He is their chief architect of what they call Next Gen, which is exactly that, the next generation of, how we do aviation.
Okay, interesting. Thank you. I see on the queue that we got Mr. De Silva.
Thanks. Good morning, all. As just to a small observation, the name of the ICAO group, although it's too correctly explained, the groups existing, but in case of ICAO, the focus will be always what we call TFSG, or Trust Framework Study Group, instead of directly the identity, although the working group on identity is the one dealing with digital identity for manned and unmanned aircraft. Thank you.
Thank you. Third bullet, do you want Stu to go on with the registration to the operation workshop?
Okay, so I got an email back just after midnight from the organizing committee saying that ROW number 9 has accepted our abstract, and we need to confirm our final title by tomorrow, and they would like to give us a total of a 20-minute time slot, including both the presentation and the Q&A. This is the registration operations workshop, and they're also going to have a panel discussion focused on DNS privacy and encryption, and they've invited one of us to participate in that panel. So one thing I'd be looking for today is, do you all want me to handle that, or is there someone who would like to step up to be our working group's speaker, if you will, on the panel focused on DNS privacy and encryption?
Okay, so I'm wondering, where does this workshop take place?
Give me just a moment. It was supposed to be face-to-face, and I think it was supposed to be in Montreal,
Okay.
but it's actually going to be virtual. Give me just a moment to dig it up.
I think it's June 16th.
Yeah, we can do that another time to think a little bit more on that. So,
Yeah, if anybody wants to go to the website, it's regiops.net, regiops.net. And it is indeed online on June 16th from 1300 to 1600 Universal Time.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, just one comment about the, I would say the DNS privacy, etc. I don't think that we as a working group we have, I would say the authority to talk or about, I'd say about the current views from the IETF about the extensions to DNS privacy and so on. And I do think that's the more appropriate working group are more people from DNS Hub or ad working group. So I think that Eric, we can always attend as individuals, but I don't think as a working group we can present, I would say, a view on this extensions. If Eric can handle, I would say, this request to people from DNS Hub or related working group, that would be really great.
Actually, there is another working group that's doing this, which is DNS privacy.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, but I think. Please go, Matt.
Yeah. So Eric, do you can you please take care of this request and relay this? I would say this invitation to deprive chairs if they want to attend this panel.
Yeah, the only thing is you can send me the information.
Yes, I will forward it to you immediately.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, and I don't think they were asking us to represent the IETF on DNS privacy and encryption. I suspect DNS Priv is probably already participating. I think what they were looking for is, would we be willing to participate in the panel from the perspective of, the application that we are addressing?
Yeah, that was my understanding as well. Okay, so well, we need to think a little bit on that to clarify that, but I think it's really important that I mean this socialization work you're doing, and especially this workshop is a very good introduction to the architecture document where we could see, I mean, how we can take leverage from DNS, but also what are our specific requirements and regarding to the DNS protocol. That's one aspect, but the other one is also the DNS architecture. So next slide. The agenda today. Well, we have we have two main documents, which is the requirements and the architecture document. So emphasis is going to be on the requirements. And then open mic will follow. So the agenda, and here is a slide. So the floor is yours.
Okay. I'd like to rip through these a lot more quickly than the time that you've given me. So next slide. Okay, so I'm jumping right in because you've all seen the background, and if you haven't seen the background, some of it's in the backup slides. So the first three and most fundamental general requirements are provable ownership, provable and binding, and provable registration. By provable ownership, this means that the ID that is asserted, the prover needs to prove that in fact they are in possession of the private key associated with that ID. Provable binding just means, well, there's more than just the identity claim message, the so-called basic ID message in the ASTM standard. There's messages about, where am I and in what direction am I going and how fast, and we want to bind all those other messages to the ID. And then finally, provable registration I want to say not only I am Stu, but I am Stu and I am in the, blue registry as opposed to the red or the green registry or whatever. And the value of that is, first off, to just prove that I really am in a legitimate registry, any legitimate registry. But then if the registries are colored, if you will, now that colorization of the registries can be used by observers to make trust decisions just based upon, what club's membership list am I on? Any discussion of these requirements before we move on? Okay, next slide. These are less fundamental, but nonetheless important. The registries as contemplated by the folks who were working this problem before we came along, we're just looking at, oh, great, there's this free text in a registry and eyeballs can look at it and they can do stuff with that information. Whereas we think it's important that software be able to do stuff with that information as well. Gateway, this is an idea that Bob has been working, the idea of crowdsourced remote ID. I don't explicitly reference crowdsourced remote ID as such in the requirements because that's a solution approach. But I do say that we need to be able to get back and forth between broadcast remote ID and network remote ID. Actually, not back and forth, just forth, because you would pipe broadcast into network. Wouldn't make any sense to pipe network into broadcast. And then I'm calling it finger because that's what it feels like to me, but we need a better name. We need a way to reach out and touch someone. In other words, because this identifier, we're going to make software readable, not just human readable. We want to be able to take that identifier and use it to reach out and establish IP-based connectivity, which is not the same thing as saying that we want the identifier to be an IP address. That would be a tragic mistake. Any discussion on these three? Okay. And please, somebody who has a better name than finger, send it to me in an email or whatever. And next slide. Great. Okay. These are a family of miscellaneous requirements. Even though QoS might seem to be a reach here, really these messages are being required by the external standards and the regulators to go out with a certain frequency, to be received with a certain frequency. In other words, maybe I send them once per second, and we need to ensure that over a period of 3 seconds, at least one of those 3 gets through. Obviously, mobility is central to what we're doing here. That drives a requirement for multi-homing so that you have make before break handoff and just general resiliency. Multicast, I've listed it as a should. I've received some commentary that perhaps it should be a must. I was leery of making it a must, even though I'm a huge IPv6 multicast fan and see it as having a lot of applicability. And then finally, management. The people who are using this for situational awareness of what's going on in the airspace, they need to know how good their receiver network is. Are there holes in the coverage where they would have visibility? Any discussion on these?
So I think on the queue I have Eric.
Yeah, quick questions too. You presented last time a very similar requirements. Are they identical or have there been some changes?
Oh, I'm sorry. We appear to be looking at the previous version of the slides. I had an introductory slide that I didn't see just now that's a summary of changes.
So do you want me to go at a specific slide or?
Well,
I think
slide
you
all
have,
the way back to the beginning and we'll see if it's there, but I think you may be working with the previous version.
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
I have already sent you the link, Daniel, so you can just use it.
And don't derail everything, right? So continues to.
Okay.
All
All right. Yeah, so drop down to the next page of requirements after number 11.
I can change the slides if you want.
Sure, that'd be great.
Okay. See, I'm improving. So tell me. Stop.
Back up one. Right there. That's the one that Eric just asked for. Definitions, we got rid of a lot of the redundancy between the two documents, which had not been intentionally inserted as a copy and paste. It was a result of the two documents being forks of what was originally a single document. There were some things that were essentially unnumbered requirements that were late adds previously that are now numbered requirements. We've broken out the registry requirements as a separate group rather than having them lumped into the general. We've done a lot of the harmonization as discussed. I've updated some of the references to other drafts. Bob has been extremely busy. He's quite a prolific writer. Andrei Gurtov gave us a discussion limitations section. Bob gave me a section on the privacy. Oops, I've got a redundancy right in there. Broadcast personally identifiable information privacy section. Shouldn't be a second PII. In the architecture draft, Andrei Gurtov has also given me some ASCII art, which has gone into both drafts. We've got additional authors now, Andrei and Shuzhao. And we've got comments in there from all of those people and probably a couple of others. I tried to be comprehensive in listing them, but I've doubtless made an omission at some point. So now let's jump down to requirement number 11. And on to the next, identifier requirements. The first 5 requirements are as before, but per some advice received, I added the parenthetical note on ID number 1 length. We didn't make up this 20 bytes. This is to fit into the ASTM F3411 standard, which is recognized by the civil aviation authorities, and they in turn are attempting to fit into a Bluetooth 4 advertisement payload, which only has a total of 25 bytes, and there's about 5 bytes of overhead of the F3411 wrappers, leaving us only 20 bytes for the actual ID itself. That's the only change here in the identifier requirements. Next slide. All right, now there's an additional, back up one, please. Yeah, there's an additional identifier requirement beyond the 5 we previously had. This is unlinkability. That had previously been addressed in the text, but not as a numbered requirement. And then we've got some what I'm calling explanatory text that this is not a requirement on identifiers, and we don't know who's going to actually assign identifiers, but all of these entities need to be in agreement on what an identifier is. Next. Okay, privacy requirements. These are pretty much as before, and I have gotten some feedback that storage requirements is going a little bit beyond the field that the IETF normally roams. Now, there's a lot of debate on the privacy stuff because it's a balance between privacy of the operator and transparency of what's going on in the airspace around me as a member of the public who presumably has a legitimate right to know, what all this buzzing is that's going on over my head that potentially might fall on my head. I guess all I can do right now is note that there is tension between those two competing concerns, which is why in the initial regulations and the ASTM standard, everything is clear text. Next slide.
I would point out on this slide that I've tried to capture that tension in the discussion I have in the DRIP operator privacy draft and kind of show when you can and cannot expect to be private. So comments on that text would be greatly appreciated from all parties.
Thanks, Bob. All right, next slide if we could.
Yeah, just a comment. I think one of the problems is that privacy is not a generic context, a generic concept. You want to be private to some members and disclose your privacy, being able to disclose that privacy to others. So that's where I think some of the balance should be.
Yes, Definitely. There's a scoping of privacy. Privacy from whom and, under what circumstances. My privacy expectations can be higher when I'm hovering over the middle of my 300-acre farm than when I'm hovering by the fence to the neighboring nuclear reactor.
Yeah.
Next slide, please. Okay, these mostly were here before. As a matter of fact, they were all here before, but they were just lumped in with general requirements, and the general requirements list was getting pretty long, and this was actually a logical grouping. Unfortunately, I just made more work for Bob because he now needs to go through his drafts and change some of the references therein. But these are the registry's requirements of which we are thus far aware.
Just a comment about this one, Stuart. In the review I have sent to you, yeah, so there is some, I would say, some mentions of the individual drafting requirements. So I don't know if you have cleaned up that part, or so that we can focus only on the requirement itself rather than going into, I would say, specific solution documents.
Right. Yeah. So Bob has just written recently a UAS RID draft, which is, my look at it is it's essentially what used to be called within the IETF an applicability statement, pointing out other drafts that address specific issues of the problem. And Bob's regarding that as kind of the clearinghouse for where all the gozindas and gazaudas of different documents could go. And so I can, point to that, and I began to point to that in the most recent rev of requirements and architecture.
Yeah, my point is that if we, is to avoid, I would say, pointing to other documents and to generalize or to sketch or to write the requirement in such a way that we are not, I would say, promoting some solution document. So we can have something which is really standalone. We don't need to point to other individual documents. That would be more cleaner for me for a requirement document. I know that you have already done some work to remove some of that in the previous version, but I see that we need to do a little bit more effort so that we can, I would say, remove these pointers, because I think that we don't need those pointers.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. There's probably some vestigial stuff that needs to be scrubbed out.
Thanks.
Next. Okay, that was it for what I had for requirements. Basically, it was a lot of cleanup of the organization of the requirements. I didn't really have any new requirements brought to me in the past month. So, shall we proceed with architecture?
Do we have any
Next.
questions? I see no one in the queue, so let's move ahead.
Okay, this slide is as before, just as context. These are the players, the aircraft themselves, the observers, the operators, public and private registries, and DNS. And one of the things that I definitely need to do in the requirements draft is clarify what's an operator versus a pilot in command versus a remote pilot, and so on. That is reflected here in this slide, and it's reflected but not explicitly in the requirements draft. And I want to go back to people like ICAO and make sure that I use their definitions rather than rolling my own. I mean, this is a well-established community that's been setting standards for decades, and they have a language, and we want to speak their language. Next. Okay, this is one of the pieces of ASCII art that Andre provided. It just shows that the network grid data flow may or may not start with the unmanned aircraft, although there is definitely information flow back and forth between the unmanned aircraft and its operator. But then basically network grid starts with the operator's ground control station, flows through the internet to the network grid. Oops. Got to make a correction here. Flows from the operator to the service provider, from the service provider to the display provider, from the display provider to the observer. So I just got to change DP and SP. I got to flip those labels. Next slide. This is unchanged. This is the list of entities, and most of the entities pre-exist. They are not things that DRIP is defining. Even the registries, we're just adding detail that is missing from the external standards. Everybody knows there need to be registries, but everybody has punted what those registries will look like, and what protocols will be used to put information into them and pull information out of them. And then, of course, if someone adopts the optional crowdsourced remote ID, then that adds 2 additional entities, some hopefully large number of finders, and at least 1 supplemental data service provider to aggregate the information from all of those finders and make it available. Next slide.
Stuart Silhall, quick question.
Anyone willing to say something?
Phil Hall, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Thanks a lot. Sometimes I have some audio problems here, but back to Stuart. Stu, on the registries, are we assuming, who are we assuming is owning or responsible for those registries? For instance, the US, the FAA would have a registry of registered aircraft and potentially licensed pilots. Makes that available through what they call the FIMS to the USS providers. Are you considering that in your architecture, or who actually is owning the registries?
Thanks, Phil. Yeah, so I'm trying to remain somewhat generic between the way the FAA wants to do business and the way, for instance, the EASA wants to do business. In the FAA's concept of the world, some of these registries are owned and operated by the FAA themselves and accessible through, for instance, SWIM. I guess I was just trying to make the point that there are 2 fundamental classes of registries, those that will be generally accessible to the public and those that will be accessible only with some form of access controls. It's widely anticipated that some form of registry function will be performed by the USSs, but that will not be the end of the story, because the USSs are primarily there to serve the UAS operators, and other constituents may need to turn to things other than a USS to get the services that they need. I don't know if that was an answer to your question or not, Phil.
That's okay, Stuart. That just helps me understand where you're coming from. Is that obviously it's going to depend on who is owning and managing the data, and therefore taking responsibility for the overall management of the privacy issue from a policy perspective. And I still think that's work in progress, not just in the US, but internationally.
Oh boy, is it.
Yeah, so one thing that I've seen is that FAA, some of FAA's thinking is still based upon the past, where there just weren't that many different aircraft, and there weren't that many different aircraft operators, and there weren't that many different fixed-based operations. And so it was feasible for the FAA, with their resources, to keep track of it all. Whereas with unmanned aircraft, we could easily get to a situation where the average human has 3 or 4 of them. Now, that's not next week, but, we could get to that point. And there's already more unmanned aircraft than manned. In 2015, I think, there were more unmanned aircraft sold than the total number of manned aircraft that had been sold in the history of human aviation. And it hasn't gotten smaller since then. So I've been trying to address as well scalability beyond what the FAA, at least, has been contemplating. Next slide. This is also unchanged, but it probably should be changed. There may be additional operations that are not on this list, so I would really solicit everybody to look at this list and identify what's missing.
I think we have Shuai in the list. In the
This
queue.
is Shui. Yeah. I'm just wondering if anybody has talking to any entity who's in the USS business. This looks like to me, we might get some resistance from those people because it's directly cut into their business. They might need some architecture change to reflect the registration, searching, register.
I guess I'm not suggesting that we would stand up something that would compete with the USS's, but rather suggesting that we might be able to provide standards so that USS's can do things in an interoperable and consistent fashion.
I agree because the current USS, there's no like written statement that US should do and how to do that. What FEP does is this public, this lengthy program, but there's no way for us to know how they're going to operate, except this REST APIs and all the data format that they have provided.
Right. I mean, we have the discovery and synchronization service, which is reasonably well defined, and we have the inter-USS protocol, which is moderately well defined. But there's a lot that they don't say.
Yeah, just to give you a heads up, in 3GPP, anything we do, which is anything we propose, which is has anything to do with the USS, we're gonna get this strong pushback. I can give you some companies like Airbus. They have their business in the USS, UTM. They don't want anybody to push any standard for them to implement.
Yeah, so that's a good point, and I guess I'll expand upon it a little bit. If we get so much pushback that we cannot say anything about USS's, then we basically cannot say anything about anything, because USS's are the fat spider in the middle of the web that is UTM.
Right. I totally agree. But right now, there's nobody in the call from USS or UTM, right? Just if the leader, I think the last time there's a person from Airbus was joining the call. He didn't see much of the stuff, but eventually that might be a little problem for us.
All we can do is hopefully hold out a hand to show that there's a way that can make it more open for the UAS manufacturers to work with across the board with the USSs. If they don't have standards, then each UAS manufacturer will do something different for each place they sell their equipment. So that's where hopefully we will have to come in and hold an offering hand to them. That's all we can do.
Yeah. One thing for context, USSs are related to what in manned aviation is called an ANSP, an Air Navigation Service Provider, and different countries have adopted different models. In some countries, there is one and only one ANSP, and it is the same thing as the Civil Aviation Authority. It is a governmental agency. In other countries, there is one and only one ANSP, but it is a private company to which the CAA has contracted the function. And then in still other countries, there are multiple ANSPs with, territories, if you will, that are somehow defined by the CAA. And so we're going to have, a somewhat similar situation here. And right now, most of the USS providers are trying to be the one ring to rule them all. So I guess next slide. There we go. Background on identifiers. F3411 basic ID message gives us exactly that to work with. An F3411 authentication message, even if we were allowed to use all 10 pages of it, has exactly 224 bytes available, minus any error control. And in the US, the FAA has said you need to have error correction, which is not present in the ASTM standard. And the most obvious way to do that would use 23 of those 224 bytes, leaving you with 201 bytes to work with, which obviously you're not going to fit an X.509 certificate in that. And that's where we start moving into proposed solution space. So we've done a great deal of work in this area, and I'm trying to cut right through my corpus callosum with a knife and say, okay, this half of my brain is going to work on solutions that I very much believe in and that we've already prototyped and tested in part, and this other half of my brain will try to write requirements that are not wrapped around those solutions. But as we move from requirements to architecture, it's not at all clear to me how I can describe an architecture without reference to our proposed solution approach.
I just have a comment. I think in a vehicular communication, they're using another format for a certificate. I can't remember the format, and that one is much smaller than 509.
Bob, I don't know if you can speak to that, since I know you've worked in V2V as well.
Their certificate, and they have large message frames to work in. They're doing 802.11 OCB. They have a large MTU. They can deal with fairly regular X509 certificates. We don't have that option here. We have to work within the Bluetooth messages. Even Bluetooth 5 frames will not be able to handle anything that. I have worked a fair bit with trying to make small certificates. I've gotten EDDSA certificates as small as 600 bytes. But then it's almost like nothing in the issuer name or the subject name. So it's pretty much a non-starter in this arena.
Okay, thank you. I see in the queue, Shui Tao.
Thanks. This is Shui. I just want to say, I think the HIP is generally is really good solution for the remote IDs. A quick update from the HPP. This in SA2, there is still no solutions how to assign and how to design the remote IDs. There are a bunch of gangsters trying to come up with their solutions. There's no agreement. I was hoping we can just move forward with this solution and get it out, and people can refer to. Even though maybe as the people won't use it, but that's one of the standards that they can refer to.
Okay, so what you're saying is that 3GPP is in favor of a HIP-based solution.
They have no favor.
Okay.
The strong reference to ASTM, but there are strong disagreement regarding either ASTM1 is good, either just using regular MAC address or some other solutions. There's no agreement. So at this point, this is still under discussion for each meeting. But I think the only reason they don't have any solution is because there's no standard.
Okay.
And I think this HIP one is great one.
Okay, thank you.
Best news I've heard all month. Thank you. Next slide.
I see that Philip is also on the queue.
Oh, sorry.
Philip?
Sorry, I didn't. I think it's Zhao is on the queue. Not me.
It's a Shui, yeah.
Okay, Stewart, please go forward. Thanks.
Okay, so next slide. So a lot of the definitions in the requirements draft are stuff that I wrote, and that's not what they should be. I need to go back to ICAO and other, authoritative sources like that and make sure that our definitions are in alignment with theirs. I'll just spend a moment on plural forms. I've gotten a fair amount of feedback on that, and stylistically, I used to do it in the way that was suggested in the feedback that I've received, but eventually when it became clear that the EASA, the FAA, and ICAO were all doing it in the way where for most of these acronyms, the plural form and the singular form are exactly the same, I finally yielded to, what this user community is doing. We want to continue our coordination with the Trust Framework Study Group. I think we need to increase our focus on registration. Do we want to move out more on crowdsourced RID? Do we want to get serious about operator to pilot comms? That's something that I personally think is very important. And it was contemplated, I believe, by the Aviation Rulemaking Committee back in 2017, but it is not reflected in any of the external standards or notices of proposed rulemaking. This is where I say, okay, there I am, and I have my device, and I've got an ID, and now what? What good is it to me? I mean, if I want to go sue the guy later or fine him later, it's fine for that. But if I want to communicate with him right now and say, hey, guy, you need to leave that airspace that you're in because you may not know this, but, we have an emergency on our hands, and it's no longer the place and time to be out, for a Sunday afternoon kite flying exercise.
Stu, don't you mean observer to pilot, not operator to pilot?
Yes.
That's observer.
Yes. Thank you very much, Bob. That was hurriedly creating this slide in response to a request that there be such a slide. Yes, that is a gross error on my part. Observer to pilot comms. Yes.
And another remark here, I'm not sure it fits the drip chart at all. But we can see on this communication stuff.
That's a good point. It may be for our next push. It may be out of scope of our charter as currently stated. Yes.
Yeah.
I think Mr. De Silva wants to say something.
Thanks, Stu. Just a question. When you talk about this communication between the observer and the pilot, what is the context of that? Because in civil aviation nowadays, this is not allowed at all. What is the context of that? Because it looks like from an international civil aviation perspective, it doesn't make any sense. But maybe you have an explanation for that.
Yeah. Well, so remember, we're not in the world of air traffic control. We're in the world of UAS traffic management. These things are in much more intimate proximity to humans and sensitive facilities and so on. And it is often necessary to, urgently communicate with the operator of an aircraft. And so the classic example that I like to give is there's a fire and I'm a fireman and I've responded to the scene and I observe an aircraft, hovering in the area where my firemen are attempting to fight the blaze. Now, I don't know, is that aircraft, from another fire department that also responded to the same large blaze, or is that aircraft from a local, television news organization that's at least going to be professionally operated, but may not be coordinated with our emergency response effort? Or is that aircraft just some gawker who may not even be all that well trained in how to fly, and he's going to get in the way and cause further danger for my firefighters, right? So unmanned aircraft system remote identification alone allows me to discriminate which of those three classes he is in. But let's say that he is in the second or third class. He's not a fellow firefighter. I may need to call him and say, you're endangering my firefighters. Withdraw by at least 200 meters from where you are right now. And this is what I refer to as immediate actionability of the information. First off, to make it actionable, to enable someone who observes a thing to do something about the thing, he's got to be able to trust the information. And so most of our efforts in DRIP thus far have been focused on making the information trustworthy. But then, even if it's trustworthy information, if it's merely a registry database that I can look into with human eyeballs on free text on screen, and then take my cell phone and call somebody and hope that they answer and hope that they can do something about it, that's not very effective, right? Whereas if I can immediately establish, a strongly mutually authenticated and confidential end-to-end IP flow between me and the pilot in command, then perhaps we can respond more appropriately to the situation. The other scenario that I like to use as an example is air defense. If I'm an air defense operator and you blunder into an area where you shouldn't be, you'd probably appreciate my contacting you and asking you to exit before I simply shoot you down. And the UAS grid stuff, other than the original Aviation Rulemaking Committee recommendations, just doesn't address that. So does that clarify what that was all about?
I understand where you're coming from, but in a certain moment, UTM, although we keep saying that UTM and USS, they'll be isolated. No, it's not true. They will interact with ATM, the air traffic management. And as you correctly mentioned, with navigation service providers, if you allow a simple observer to contact directly a pilot, whoever it is, you can provoke a Wild West, because an observer is somebody that in principle, any observer, I'm not talking about the authorized observers who has a right equipment to identify the UAS, the UA, is an information that you cannot trust. So you are inserting a risk in the system that when you have the integration of UTM and ATM, this will not be acceptable, because it goes well beyond the principles that we follow in aviation. And my understanding is that the remote ID is exactly to allow authorized people to take action of contact, and other observers who are just observers without any police power to see and communicate with somebody else who will take the action, but not themselves contacting direct pilots, because you may generate a Wild West on that. But
Understand
about that.
No, I totally agree with you. Can we scroll back to general requirements? I think the second page of general requirements. Yeah, right there. Gen 6. Dynamically establishing with AAA per policy these communications. The idea is it's not just that Joe Sixpack can contact a pilot and create a distraction from his safe operation of his aircraft. This is the idea that a public safety observer, for instance, or an air defense operator, for instance, can reach out, and if he has the appropriate credentials required by the policy of the CAA in that particular jurisdiction, then that would enable the communication. Because if we don't get a direct contact after the satisfaction of policy has been verified, for that contact to take place, the latency requirements are simply not going to be satisfiable, right? If I, as the firefighter, have to talk to the tower, and then the tower in turn has to talk to the operator, we're going to have a problem when these things fly at 60 knots and it's only 50 meters away. So that's why I'm trying to extrapolate from the traditional approach something that will satisfy the latency requirements of the very short distances that are involved with UAS. But definitely, we can't just have Joe Sixpack bugging a pilot and interfering, with his paying attention to the safe operation of his aircraft.
Stu. It's Phil Hall. I had my hand up in the queue, so can I jump in at this point?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
jump.
Okay, so I think what will be really helpful in the discussion here is that we actually try to develop a set of use cases that flash out practical, well, first of all, the practical environment that we will see that where such communications could occur. Now, whether they occur within a policy or not, if we develop these use cases, they will actually either validate the policy as workable or not. In their case, it will inform our policy development. But it will identify whether the technology and the architectures we have to manage that are appropriate. I think we could talk around this for hours and hours, but I think we could certainly invest a good deal of time, and I mean invest, in actually developing a case, a number of scenarios or use cases, whatever you want to call them, that actually articulates the possibilities we see, but also as support the argument why certain use cases should be eliminated or not be allowed on the basis of practical realities as well as safety and privacy, etc.
Thanks, Phil. Yeah, I think if we go back to the in progress slide, that's my concluding slide. I think I've gotten my answer on that question. We are back up just about 3 slides. Forward a little bit. Right there. In progress. Yeah, we are not in a position to get serious about observer to pilot comms, other than in the sense that, yeah, we should document some use cases to justify, why this is a useful function. And if we find that there are no such use cases, then we abort. I think we will find that there are such use cases, but I guess that would be the next task in that area is the use cases rather than the protocols.
Yeah, and what I'm saying here is the use cases will identify the appropriate situations and the inappropriate situations. So, I'm looking at from both sides of the coin, if you like. The use case will help identify where it works and works well, and where we should not allow it for obvious use case will change.
Great. Thank you. Now, my last 3 bullets, there is a discussion limitations section that Andre has authored, and I just stuck it in the requirements draft without comment, really. And I don't know where we want to go with that. Obviously, there's a whole set of related drafts that we need to organize in some coherent form, and we could still use more help.
Just clarification, when we're talking about communications, is that, someone talking directly to the pilot saying, how are you, what's your name, or is that just a message you are in a private zone, or a pre-format messages?
So partly because I have a tendency to get the cart before the horse here with solution space, because HIP allows me to establish a strongly mutually authenticated and encrypted IP flow that can contain arbitrarily anything that IP can carry, I wasn't worrying about exactly what someone might choose to send, be it a small dictionary of predefined messages, or maybe it's even a voice over IP, SIP call.
Okay, yeah. Because that might change a little bit if we're allowing a conversations between the observer, and there might be different type of communications. That's what I was just considering.
Can I jump on the line? This is Shrey.
Yeah. Let's go.
Just wanted to say that I think in the general aviation, the how to communicate with between different aircraft it's changing quite a lot. 5 years ago, right after for flights getting very popular in the general aviation, there are so many products came out can allow or to show the EDSB data without ATC's involvement, right? Things like Stratus, right? You can actually see where the aircraft is without even talking to ATC. I think the same scenario can be applied with the UAS. Whoever adopt JERP remote ID techniques, right? And then things like ForFlight or Stratus, they can talk to remote ID provider, either from a UAS or from a third party. You can actually acquire that data and show those UAS positions or other information on their ForFlight. This is actually, I think, directly related to crowdsourced remote ID and also the observer to pilot the communications without even involved with the ATC. And from the charter, also said that the purpose of our working group is leveraging existing protocols to develop new protocols. I believe that those two is actually well fitting into the charter.
Before Adam is going into the queue, we've reached the top of the hour. So, I mean, we can continue that discussion a little bit. But if you have to leave, I'm just reminding you to register your name to the blue sheet, please. So, Adam?
Hi. So I also want to make a comment on, so Bob was messaging in the WebEx on USS policy and what have you with these observer to pilot communications. And it comes back to a point that was brought up earlier, I believe, by, actually by you, Shuai, that, you know, we don't have any USS people in the call, and this is another limitation and another feature we'd have to impose on them. As Bob's pointing out, the USS would be the one that be kind of mediate to say, oh, no, you're not allowed to do this. So I think that is something we have to keep into consideration as well.
And also, this is true. And also, we can do without the USS involvement. Like the ForFlight and Stratus doesn't even talk to ETC. They just acquire EDSB data from the ground, right? So whoever adopt IETF JERP standard, you can start their own, remote ID servers or providers, who then the other product just query the data. So we can do either way, right? So, but with the USS involvement, it's much better.
If all you have is the broadcast RID messages, you will not know how to contact the pilot. That would require going to the registry, saying, here is this US ID. Can you please tell me who the pilot is? Give me information about the pilot. So that is why I'm saying that the USS or whatever particular entity has that registry information will be mediating that connection. Even more so when you go to the net RID, which is where all the information is not observable, but it's maybe it's out of range, but you still see it in your area, and you have to then go hope they are being collected through net RID messages. So some entity was the USS, the net RID, SP or DP, whichever one it is, they are mediating that connection. Tell you who to contact.
Which could be something as simple as a hierarchical hit reverse lookup followed by a forward lookup to a HIP resource record followed by a forward lookup to an A record.
Yeah, I mean, if the UA's address is in DNS with then the right pointer for the operator's ID, then all that would flow manner. If the operator wanted to make that publicly available, yes.
Or available within a DNS-like private registry.
Mm-hmm. So I think we pretty much covered this.
So Bob, I apologize. I was hoping to take less time than allocated, and I ended up taking more time than allocated. I hope maybe if our chairs will permit that we can at least identify some of the related activity beyond these two drafts.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, Med, please.
Yes. Yeah, actually, this is what we have agreed. I would say the first interim meeting is that we will focus on the requirements and the architecture to have them, I would say, on the good shape, so that we can have the progress by, I would say, by June or July to have something which is really stable. So we do understand that there are other drafts that are on the table, and these drafts we show them in the, I would say, in our slides. So we are really we know that there are other items to be discussed, but we really need that we stay focused on the on what we are expected to deliver. So by the next bit, for the virtual IETF meeting, we are requesting, I would say, more a longer slot. So we will assign some slot for other drafts to be presented. But for the next interim meeting, the one that will be in June, we will continue in this space that we are scheduling. That means that exclusively focusing on the requirement and the architecture draft. And we don't need to wait until the interim meetings to have discussion on them. So I really hope and invite all the participants. So if there are any, I would say, suggestions, proposals, and so on, to go to the mailing list, to share them, and so that we can make some progress and to have some versions that are really stable. The requirement draft, I would say, is on a good track. But the architecture for me require more work, and really need to focus on it, so that we can have something which is really, I would say, that can be used by other people who are working on this area. And for instance, if people want to propose some change request for instance, in the 3GPP, if we have an architectural document which is really on good shape, that can be something that we can defend and discuss with delegates that are attending the 3GPP. So yeah, we are aware there are other drafts, but we really want that we can stay focused on these two ones.
Matt, all I was going to say, following up, was the drafts are out there. I invite people to read them and to comment to me directly or on the list, or both.
Perfect. So I think we make adjourn this meeting now, or is there anything that someone wants to add at that point? So yeah, so basically before closing that meeting, I think we're going to close this meeting in a few minutes. So I think the discussions were very interesting, and I think those interim meetings are quite successful. So we will continue to that. We sent a request for a session during the IETF, the next IETF meeting, so in June, end of June, or no, end of July. Yeah, I don't know how it's going to be handled. Maybe that's just going to be, I don't know how the virtual IETF is going to be, if everything is going to be within 1 week, but we will continue this interim meeting to make progress in any case. Yeah, as Ahmed mentioned, we would like to really move those requirement and architecture draft forward as soon as possible. So it's quite important that we communicate those drafts to other organizations, we get feedbacks, and yeah, and that we reach a consensus that we believe it's ready quite soon. Anyone in the queue? Yeah, go ahead. So
Thanks. This is Ray. I'm just kind of wondering, what's the milestone we have said or we haven't for this 2 draft?
I can't take the.
Yeah, for this 2 one, we have said that we wanted to have, I would say, an aggressive schedule for having stable versions and for having them in the working classical. And if I remember well, what we have agreed is to have something by end of July. So if we want to maintain that milestone, it will be really we will need to put more, I would say, more effort on it, and so that we can have something which is really stable.
So I mean, you will see like end of July means send it to our IESG for obviously publication. Is that what you mean?
For the working group last call, that's the I would say that's what we have discussed in the first interim meeting we had. That's a milestone. So we will see if we will meet it and have the target, and if we all together work on it and share the comments, review, and send it to Stewart and all the other authors, we can do it. Otherwise, it will be it will be difficult to meet this one.
Yeah, I think we should. I think.
Yeah, for me, this is really a prerequisite if we want to ignite other works to have these two ones, because otherwise we will waste our effort and energy in other items, and we won't progress on these two ones that are that are the I would say what we are expected to deliver to the ISG.
Yeah, okay, I agree. I think we are. IETF is already way ahead of the other gangsters in terms of this topic. So I would prefer we can get something out as a reference for others, to look at it. So at this point, we are the first one on top, I think. Personal opinion.
Well, I will point out that the ANSI roadmap gaps are important for people to look at. I will post again the URL to get the previous version, and you can look at the gaps, and when the month will be the final version of version 2. Look at the gaps that ANSI and others have identified, and look at where we can have a hand in. Many of them don't apply to us, like manuals, stuff like that, safety design. But a lot of areas do apply to us. Look at the gaps and see how they map to our requirements. I think that would be another important thing.
Thank you, Bob.
This is Adam. I agree with Bob. I've always seen this working group as a bit unusual, I guess, in the sense that, we're looking out on outside and another thing, and we're seeing gaps that we can fill with IETF protocols. So, we can move much faster than they can. I think that's been evident over the past couple of months, that we're moving much quicker than they are, and I agree with Med that we are ahead of them. So we can move faster to fill holes with stuff that we already know works and can be applied to given problems.
And by the way, they asked me if IETF is doing anything on blockchain, because in one area in transaction tracking, they're proposing that there's a gap, that there's no blockchain work. And I don't know much that we're doing in blockchain in IETF.
It's IRTF, I think.
Yes, it's IRTF. But I was asked.
Okay, so yeah, I think we're making good progress, but we don't need to relax now. We're in pretty good track, I think. And yeah, thank you to everyone to attend the meeting and to move that work forward. And I'm waiting to see you at the IETF or next interim meeting.
Yes, and please use the mailing list to share your comments and your reviews.
Anyone translate the last sentence format in the chatting box? I was like, what? Couldn't understand. All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Goodbye, everyone.